And that led me to the field of governance and to discover a toolkit called sociocracy, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And this feels really relevant in this particular moment, especially as many of us are in the United States. We stand at a juncture where we're being offered two different visions of our future, one of which is rooted in ecological destruction, inequality, authoritarian retrenchment, and having power concentrated among a select few who are incapable of responding to many of the crises that we face. And on the other hand, we have an opportunity to build a radical reorganization of power at every level, from our workplaces to our neighborhoods to our government. And in this sense, we would be building a society where participation is no longer performative, but real and participatory, where we have meaningful choices, where our input is valued, and we're also resourced and empowered in our work. And so that's the world that we're trying to build, and that we'll be hopefully getting some tools to help us with today. On a more micro level, many of us experience governance in really small ways day to day. This is a screenshot from a WhatsApp group chat for a church group that I'm a part of, where people are asking people's input on what time they should host a service. And so this is commonly how we experience governance or democracy in small ways, like a poll where the majority will decide how a given decision will be made. And so you can see here, the question was 5 o'clock or 5:30 p.m. for this event. People voted. 4 people wanted 5 o'clock p.m. 2 of us wanted 5:30 p.m. More people wanted 5 o'clock p.m. So that's when the event is going to be held. However, what this misses is some of the contextualizing information about why people wanted certain times. And so there's a lot of input that isn't included when we just do a majority vote system. For example, I couldn't make the earlier time because I had a conflict, so I'm not going to end up being able to attend at all. Whereas somebody who selected 5 o'clock p.m. as their preference, maybe it was just a preference or a schedule optimization, but they would have been fine to have it be later. Maybe there's decisions here and options here that were never included in the options for selection, like having it at 8 p.m. or having it next week or doing a potluck. And so we can just kind of see the ways in which even inclusive decision-making practices that we currently lean on sometimes don't allow a full picture, and aren't as participatory and effective as we might think they are. And sociocracy is a set of tools to help overcome some of those more limited frameworks. So during this workshop, I'm going to try to model some of the sociocratic practices that I'm going to be talking about. And one of those is consenting to an agenda. So I'm the facilitator of this meeting, in case you didn't realize. And so I'm proposing an agenda here of how we spend our time together. And so would love like a thumbs up or a plus in the chat if this sounds good to you, if this is why you're here. But we're going to start off by talking about governance and how technology impacts governance. The theme of the Management and Justice Conference that this presentation is a part of really focused on technology, so want to make sure we're integrating that frame. And then we'll jump to talking about a few basic principles and practices that are a part of sociocracy. And after each of those core practices, I'm going to have a moment for discussion so we can actually like chat and engage and hear about the orgs that you all are a part of. And then we'll have a little reflection and check out. But I guess thumbs up. Does that sound good to anyone? Any other input or ideas? Sweet. Thanks. Love that everyone's already on to the thumbs up consent. So yeah, zooming out a little bit, I'm not sure how familiar everyone here is with what organizational governance is, but in our context, just the agreements about how we work together. It's kind of like the meta decisions around who decides, who gets to decide something, what is each team tasked with doing, what roles are a part of different teams, where do they live? And so it's kind of the set of norms and agreements that guide our actions and our work together. And we might be most familiar with governance in the form of like bylaws or articles of incorporation, maybe community norms, these sort of like hard documents that are supposed to shape how we work together. But the ways in which we experience governance is often much more immediate and felt. It's something that we like experience in our bodies, in like the anger we might feel when someone makes a decision that we thought we were going to be included in, but we get kind of steamrolled over. The anxiety that we feel when someone like takes the mic at a Q&A and like talks for too long. It's also the joy and like the flow state that comes from being in a team that's in sync and that's working towards shared goals together. So the goal is to get into this flow state, to have governance be this invisible support that allows us to do our work together and to pool our shared resources. Um, so that's kind of just a helpful image, I think. And so even mission-oriented organizations and justice-oriented organizations that many of us are a part of can be susceptible to some of these like swimming upstream dynamics by having unaccountable leaders, workers who are burned out, people who are most in touch with the actual activities of an organization, not having the channels to shape that work and decide those questions that were on the previous slide. And this can lead us to want to like take this the board gavel and like hack at the organizational structure and get rid of all the hierarchy. But oftentimes what can happen is that in trying to dismantle unhelpful power structures, we don't leave anything in its place. And that can oftentimes enable informal hierarchy to run rampant. And so things like power dynamics around race or gender, ability, um, relational ties and histories, all that can kind of come into play and replace the formal hierarchies. And so what's needed is an alternative system to share power and attend to where it's flowing so that it doesn't end up collecting in weird places where it is operating without us understanding. And so I guess maybe a quick like check-in or pause here, and glad to see some different things in the chat, but do people like are the organizations that you're a part of, do you actually know how they make decisions or do they have like stated norms or practices, whether written down or otherwise, that are guiding your operations? I'm curious if anyone can give like a thumbs up or a note at if you're a part of an org where there are these things determined, whether they're egalitarian or not. I guess some people are saying yes, some people are saying no. So yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag. And yeah, this is I'm sure some of you are wondering how I got a hold of your org's organizational chart, but this is a joke, but I think it demonstrates the ways in which um, people who are sometimes power hungry or absent structure, the appropriate structures and processes, even well-intentioned people can end up uh, being corrupted, so to speak, and that those of us at the bottom are left feeling like losers or like we don't have a say, we don't have control of our organizations. This is not a piece of scholarly research, to be clear. Um, and we also find ourselves, last piece of framing here would be that we're in a little bit of an unprecedented moment when it comes to the convergence of different digital tools and realities on our work, especially for those of us who are knowledge workers in the United States. I think this is particularly relevant. Um, but we have remote workplaces. A lot of our work is mediated by digital tools. Even right now, we're not in like a circle in a classroom. We're also impacted as people by the provision of technology. So even if we're showing up in a physical space, we have phones in our pockets and might feel like we're distracted or we're coming from a work day that was 8 hours on a computer. That impacts like who we are, our desires, our needs. So just want to be mindful about that. And technology can be leveraged in ways to promote collaboration and shared power. There's a particular field now of cooperation technology that can, apps and trackers and frameworks for facilitating power sharing. But on the flip side, a lot of our digital platforms can silo communication. And thinking of like the culture of like direct messages where you're DMing a lot of people and asking the same questions and you're not getting that in the shared reality of an organization. And also just not being in person as much can mean that there aren't as many opportunities to build the kind of trust and rapport and more dynamic sense of who people are to be able to lean on more collaborative work mechanisms. And so, yeah, those of you who were a part of our conference earlier in March will know that Dr. Gumbo talked about returning to indigenous conceptions of technology and broadening our perspective of what counts as technology. And so I want to propose governance as a technology for the digital age, and that a lot of the problems that we're facing can't be solved by digital technology alone, but actually require more human and governance solutions in collaboration with the appropriate technologies. So sociocracy is rooted in three principles: um, consent-based decision making, which we'll talk about in a second and define; interlinked work circles, so small teams that get work done together that are nested in a broader organizational structure; and then finally, evolution and the idea of like a learning organization. Just like in living ecosystems share resources and information across different spaces and places, we want our organizations to be living in that same sense, taking an input from their environments, metabolizing it, and being able to like adapt and evolve, which is really important. I know we have a lot of environmental students here, and this is particularly important when we're talking about being able to adapt to our changing ecological environments and political environments in light of climate change. So sociocracy is just a set of tools to share power, and it's rooted in the idea that those who are doing the work should be the ones deciding about the work. The main contribution I feel like it lends, or that I find myself emphasizing when I'm talking about sociocracy to people who aren't familiar, is the way in which it balances effectiveness and inclusion, or effectiveness and equivalence. So the goal is to like integrate a commitment to action and like a forward moving like momentum, while balancing that with the need for everyone to be heard and included in those decisions. And so it's a hierarchy of aims and like purposes and the nesting of different goals versus a hierarchy of people, which we'll see in a second. And I've named a few different like related fields here on this slide, just for those of you who are deeper in the management field and are curious about some of the influential concepts and adjacent methods of governing. And yeah, I guess by way of a little bit of history, humans have been coming into circles for healing and counsel and decision making for centuries, and that's not a new concept or something that sociocracy claims to have invented. It's definitely like a manifestation of some of those more shared human tendencies and principles. And the field of sociocracy, as such, as like an organizational governance method, has its own rich intellectual tradition that comes out of Europe and involves some different influences by Quakers. So I can talk more about that at a future training, but just wanted to name both the universal and specific traditions that are apparent in some of sociocracy's structures. So yeah, again, kind of the three principles here. And the goal of all this is to help organizations move towards achieving their goal, the aim, the reason they're created. So it's all at the service of like, why are we here? So yeah, I'll pause there. Um, the next, the main, now I'm going to dive into the three different components of sociocracy, and we'll move pretty quickly to getting into our discussion. I saw a question in the chat about which part comes from Europe. The sociocratic circle method, or SCM, which is like this like handbook on how to structure an organization in this way and use these practices. That's what's coming out of Europe in particular, in terms of the people who like codified that. But you can probably find many of these practices across all human societies and under different names as well. So consent is the decision-making framework used in sociocracy. And it's both a way to make decisions tangibly and also a broader culture of checking in with people, asking for people's like okay when you're doing stuff. A lot of us probably already operate in some contexts, in might operate using consent in certain contexts. Like if you have roommates, you might say like, "Hey, I cleaned out the condiment section of the fridge. Like, hope that was okay." Like after the fact, that's kind of an embodiment in some ways of like a consent culture of moving forward, doing things within reason, while also making sure that you're respecting people's needs and interests. Although that might be a bad example in some ways because it was more retroactive, but I think it still can be useful. Um, so our prior example of how majority vote isn't always as helpful as we might want it to be. On the flip side, this is a different example from a group chat that embodies more autocratic decision making. Not the details are important, but someone was essentially deciding, it seems unilaterally, to rename a group chat and adapt the purpose of it. And there doesn't seem to be context for like input from the broader membership of the group chat, um, or yeah, or any avenues to weigh in on this decision. So that's sort of the other side of the coin that I think we often experience in both digital spaces and also our own work environments, school environments. And so consent decision making is trying to split the difference. Instead of having one person decide or have a majority that rules and silences a minority, people oftentimes want to do consensus decision making, which is different from consent, in the sense that consensus means that everybody decides, everybody agrees. And that can often, while valuable in its own right, in many work settings, that can feel tedious or isn't attuned to relevance, in the sense that maybe I'm a part of a community garden, and if we all have to go around and decide what kind of fertilizer we're going to use on the carrots, like, and for every different plant, it might take a long time. And a lot of us might not really feel like we care that much about that decision and would be happier delegating that to a smaller group of people. So consent is a way of deciding things that's rooted in no one having objections to a certain decision. So the goal isn't that that a certain proposal is everyone's preference, but that no one objects to it on the grounds that it would get in the way of an individual's own work or that it would prevent the organization from achieving its aim. So in the case of, it's a good example, in the case of an office that's trying to hire an intern, maybe my coworker wants to hire a summer intern. I'm like, I don't know if that's needed. I don't really feel like our energy should be put towards that, but it's actually not going to be harmful. I don't really mind that much. And it's not going to stop the organization from doing what it needs to do. Like, I can live with that. You can try hiring an intern. Like, you have the budget. I can approve that. Um, on the flip side, you could see somebody objecting to that same decision if maybe the intern wasn't going to be paid. It was an unpaid internship, and maybe it was an economic justice organization. And so I might object to that proposal on the grounds that, you know what, that's not having an unpaid intern might like not be aligned with our purpose as an org and might get in the way of us actually achieving our mission of economic stability. So objections in consent decision making are rooted in sort of like reasoned objections versus just like personal preferences in order to enable like forward motion and decision making. So the question is sort of like, is a decision good enough for now and safe enough to try? Often becomes like the litmus test. And the way in which, last piece here before we turn to chatting a little bit is rounds or speaking one person after another in sort of a circle-like format is oftentimes the way in which consent decision making is practiced. What this can do is allow for people to be heard who wouldn't otherwise be heard. I was in a group house a couple years back where we decided to structure our monthly house meetings in rounds where we would talk taking turns. And there were some really strong personalities in the group. There were some more shy personalities in the group. And when we started speaking in rounds, I noticed like the person who would have been more inclined to share their input and sort of direct the direction of the conversation still got to give input, but wouldn't get to determine sort of the parameters of the conversation in the same way. And likewise, my friend who was a little more hesitant to advocate for her needs in the house, or who wouldn't have felt like really saying her real opinion on something, had a little more space when she was given her own turn to talk without interruption, without people jumping in with questions right away. It gave her the space to actually give the input needed to create a strong decision as a team. And so, yeah, the way in which you can structure these kinds of speaking in rounds are to have either a predetermined speaking order or be physically in the same space. And oftentimes, when it's a bigger decision, there's these three different steps you can take to when there's a proposal on the table. Like I propose we have a summer intern. I would do a round where we each go around and ask any clarifying questions about like what do you mean? Is it a paid or unpaid intern? For how long? Things like that. Then moving to people's reactions. So just like impressions, thoughts, input to help strengthen the decision. Like maybe I would suggest like, let's make sure they're paid, or I actually know somebody who's designed a similar program. I'll connect you, but like I'm good with this. And then the consent round would be us all going around saying, kind of like we did, like thumbs up, are we good? And if that's the point at which somebody would raise an objection, if they felt that there was a reason they couldn't support that decision. And the objection wouldn't be means to stop the process entirely, but that you need to integrate that objection into the decision. So again, going back to like, it's not ignoring the two people who wanted the different time in the meeting poll. It's like taking into the account why they couldn't make the time and trying to adjust the proposal to meet their needs. So yeah, this is all kind of the same. And so a few little like tangible tools that could help us use these practices in our immediate situations are listed here. And especially these are examples from virtual work environments. But one way to get consent for those of you who operate in like a lot of group chats or Slack or Microsoft Teams workspaces could be to make a proposal in text and then ask people to like your post if they consent to it or if they agree, and say that like you'll move forward on the decision absent any objections by this time, this day. So this works for like low stakes things where you just kind of want to do a quick gut check, but need some structure. You can structure a virtual meeting discussion in rounds where again, maybe you list a speaking order in the chat. So I would put like Fernanda, Mahandra, Sammy, Marie Therese, and we would just keep going through that order whenever there was a question on the table that needed input or decisions. And then finally, you can have consenting to your agenda be a practice that you do at the beginning of a meeting. I'm not sure if those of you who have regular meetings in different groups that you're a part of have a predetermined agenda or whether you make it all together at the start of a meeting, but making that process more collaborative can be a way to integrate consent into your meetings and making sure that it's relevant. Going back to the effectiveness piece here, like maybe you have an agenda that you drafted last week, and today it's like no longer relevant. Everyone's like, I don't know why we're doing this when this other thing feels so much more urgent. So it allows space for the meeting to become relevant to everyone and therefore to increase like buy-in, participation, and effectiveness. So yeah, I guess I'm curious, I guess, again, modeling the sort of consent rounds here. I'd love to see like a thumbs up or a plus in the chat if this makes sense, if you see how consent differs from other decision-making methods like consensus or majority rules. Or if there's any clarifying questions there. Cool, seeing some thumbs up. And then, yeah, I guess I'd be curious if people want to maybe put your name in the chat if you wanted to share, answer either one of the two questions listed afterwards. If there's a setting that you're already in that uses consent and like how it's working for you, or if there's an environment where you think this kind of decision-making framework or method could be helpful. It's not, yeah, I'm just kind of curious people's experiences and if this feels like something that would be actionable or not. And to Rashid, in this current meeting, uh, I'm the facilitator, but oh, in the method, yes. Yes, we'll get to that next. But the process, the sociocratic circles that are like the team units have assigned roles. And so there's a leader, a facilitator, a delegate, and a secretary for each work circle to help like steward the work of the circle. And so the facilitator would be the person who would be like initiating the consent round or saying when it's time to move to from questions to input. So, but I think more informally, any of us in our organizations could probably find ways to, maybe insert ourselves into some of those roles or propose to the group that something happen a different way. It's a good question, though. It does require some facilitation, at least at the start. Anyone else? We can also move on and then kind of come back to some of these themes. So feel free to at any point put something in the chat if you want to discuss more. So part two, circles, and I think Rashid, your comment gets at this. Circles are how we structure work in sociocracy. If consent is how we structure decisions, circles are kind of the autonomous or the atomic or no, yeah, the atomic unit of an organization. And so the org chart, unlike a maybe top-down hierarchy or triangle, is a series of interlinked, like nested circles. And so this circle is defined by having like a purpose, an aim, and a set of resources at their disposal. Oftentimes we're given a purpose in a work team that we're a part of, but we aren't given like the authority or like the keys to the car. We don't have like actual resources that we can, like a budget or we're in charge of the tool shed if it's the community garden, whatever it may be. And that can often stop us from moving forward. So we need to delegate both power and like resources. Um, and so I'm not going to dwell too much on the circle structures because there's a lot that you could say here, but I wanted to give like a little bit of a brief orientation so you all know what's out there. Um, and if you're interested in helping to build an org from scratch or do an organizational structure overhaul in a team you're a part of, there's like a lot of resources that can help with that. But just want to give a little bit of a basic principle framework. Um, and so circles are interlinked in the sense that there's a root circle called a general circle in this model that like is kind of the coordinating circle for all other work. So if it's a small team, you might only have a general circle. And if you're a bigger organization or you have more focused work streams, you might then start creating smaller circles off of that circle that focus on particular things like a communication circle, or maybe it's the marketing circle. You could have a community outreach, any given topic, a tech support circle. Or it could be like whatever you would have like a sort of more like a team around would be a circle. And those circles each have representatives called a delegate. I think this gets back at Rashid, your question, called a delegate that is a member that goes from the smaller unit of organization up to the larger coordinating body to represent the interests in the work and create information flow from the bottom up. So it creates a formal channel and a person who has decision-making power in both circles. And that decision-making power is what ensures that it's not just like performative input or like a seat at the table, but that person has that power to have objections and like have their voice included in this consent process. So nothing can move forward at the higher circle level without approval or like input from people from the smaller work circles. So as people tend to get more focused in their work streams, there can be and like specialized, there can be a sense of like not having that information flow back up to the organization to inform its actual strategy and activities. And yeah, so circle roles, if you're going to create a circle that has all this authority and power, you want to make sure that there's some support for that. And so recommends that people name a leader who's just in charge of making sure the circle is achieving its goal. They're not in charge of the activities of the circle, but they like keep an eye on the mission of the circle. Facilitator to help run meetings and again facilitate that consent process. A secretary to keep records and notes and again report back out to other circles. And then the delegate who represents the circle at the next highest level of organization. And these are like circle specific roles, meaning they have to do with the governance and the administration of the team. But I've listed a bunch of other roles. Like you still have roles and job titles and all those other things existing in these teams and circles. And some of these same people, you could have a role that's related to your work and also be the circle secretary or also be the circle leader. Those are kind of more administrative titles and positions that can coexist with your actual work or your like substantive work on the content maybe of the circle's work. And just a few more examples of how these org charts can grow. This is a sample nonprofit structure. Here are the different teams I couldn't think of, but like legal, finance, website, just one example. And I'm curious if there's, yeah, for your own context, what this might look like. But each of these teams would have, again, reps representing at the next level up, such that that general circle would have the information and input from those smaller circles, and vice versa. And yeah, if you're somebody who is interested in how to build like federated organizations or like bigger networks where you have like local chapters or more distributed autonomous organizations that also have maybe a national or a central uh, governing body or information hub, there's some really, again, helpful tools, and this is a helpful structure to scale really large while also making sure that you, yeah, still have a functioning organization. Oh, I'm curious. Okay, that's cool. Chelsea is saying that it reminds her of the community garden structure. I'm curious if you want to share more, or like if it is it about the distribution of work to smaller teams or like the nesting dynamics?
Yeah, the fact also the delegate role, like I'm in other spaces where the smaller teams don't have a voting power. Like my synagogue, the food co-op, like there's like working groups, but they don't make big decisions. Like you kind of just like propose your big decision to the already existing body. Whereas at my community garden, like I'm on the community plots team and our delegate is Kit, and she is like a voting member of the steering committee. So there's like a big controversy about this hedge that's like a non-native big hedge in the garden, but it's like home to a lot of animals. It's like the kids love playing in it, and like from the community plots team, we're like we want to keep this hedge because it has all these assets, but there's like another team that's like the native plants team and they have like specific and they only want and they're like we're gonna take out like all of the plants that aren't native and yeah, I mean that's definitely not the only controversy in any of our worlds, but it is one additional one. And since like the community garden team is like thinking about like the public and the community, like it's our interest to like at least pause and not like excavate the garden suddenly. So she's able to like object to it basically. So she's like a voting member, and so she like is not in favor of that. So that's like reminding me of the structure of like where the little circle has like actual decision making power at the general circle.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
That's
That
fun.
is like a perfect example. And yeah, I like the comments in the chat. Um, that really hits home, I think, the power of having a meaningful voice. Any other folks have examples? Yeah, so I mean, we can discuss for a second. Um, Again, there's a lot more than we can cover in like this session, but if people generally understand what a circle is just a name for a small work team, but it does have particular components. And so, do you understand like what's needed to form a circle? Um, And then, yeah, I guess the question would be like, are there elements of circles that you feel like are missing from the work teams that you're a part of? Or that in the case of Chelsea's community garden, like that are there and are really critical to ensuring that the hedge doesn't get cut down unilaterally, which could be a really like, I mean, we joke, but that can be a really, I think that's how um, tensions and beef and like disruption can oftentimes start in organizations is over these small things where people feel like they aren't heard and they actually do have tangible impacts on people's sense of um, belonging and authority and can get in the way of people actually being able to achieve the work they want to do. Um, no worries. Thanks, Rashid. We appreciate your participation. Um, yeah, and Sammy in the chat said that it's good to practice on the micro level to empower people to act on the macro. Um, do you want to elaborate at all on that? I feel like that's a helpful point.
That was just related to what Chelsea said in terms of like in a community garden space, and it's something I've been having conversations with, particularly in the US. And if you're coming from marginalized communities, you just are not used to having voice in a lot of things. And so it can be challenging when you do open structures up on people, what are the stakes, right? And when you're just not used to having voice at all, I think sometimes, or if you're often not heard, and I'm sure female, body people have this happen a lot, like sometimes you can get really focused when you feel like you might have some power, right? And even if it doesn't seem that big of a deal. And I think it's one of those things that we have to unlearn and practice, because the challenges that we face on the larger level, right? This is something I've noticed, and I'm sure other people have as well.
Yeah, thank you. I'm seeing some resonance with other people. And I think that's a great point about, yeah, these dynamics of participation looking different in different communities, and especially based on like historical trajectories of people have or haven't had power. And that plays out too. And like I've been a part of organizations where we implement sociocracy, like I go in with my toolkit and I'm like all excited about it. And, we're making decisions this way now. And it doesn't mean that everybody's equally comfortable stepping into that power. And so that's also a part of the process is getting comfortable. And like for this to work, it requires people taking accountability for decisions and helping to implement them and being willing to raise their voice and participate too. It's not just about the structure. So it is kind of a dynamic process that yeah, it's a skill that I think we can build and we don't learn it in school as much or in broader society, like how to cooperate. And so I think is part of the power of practicing these kinds of power sharing methods at the smallest level is we begin to build those muscles. Then we might start demanding, yeah, it will feel more uncomfortable than in parts of our lives where we don't have a say. Um, if we get used to practicing it in the smaller level. Um, Yeah, and there's also kind of a meta discussion here happening as Rashid is pointing out about democracy. And so I should probably also clarify that sociocracy is a way of um, governing groups and teams versus a government or a state. Although there are certain municipalities in Europe that have implemented sociocracy, um, and there are some really promising opportunities for power sharing at the state level and in state governance. But what's sociocracy is really trying to govern smaller groups of people who are working together and have like shared purpose in a way that maybe right now are like a broader citizenry or populace might not um, be organized according to those same principles. Were there other pieces of input or anything on that? Yeah, thanks for sharing. Those of you who chimed in here. Um, So we'll move to our last section of our three principles, feedback. And as I mentioned, there's no ecological system that doesn't have feedback, and so it's worth reflecting on why our systems of organizing people should be any different. And the thrust here is that feedback, or allowing input to shape the activities of an entity, is really essential for transformative learning and for evolving. And so here are a few kind of more tangible practices that are used in organizations to ensure feedback. One of which is checkouts. So you might do a check-in round where you go around and do a round where everyone talks and says how they're doing. And likewise, you might have a check-out round where we go around and everyone shares feedback on how they're feeling after a meeting, how they thought the meeting went both on the level of structure and content. So maybe someone shares in the checkout round, like, I'm really glad we talked about that intern because I was feeling kind of stressed about my summer workload without an intern, but now I'm feeling a little more relieved. I'm a little unclear like how we're going to decide about the hedge, but like I feel like next meeting we can talk about that. So yeah, I'm feeling good. Like, and then you move to the next person, but it gives people like it's like a pressure release valve where you can kind of get out your feelings, leave anything you need to leave on the table in the meeting, and also give feedback on like next time let's do this thing differently, or I would have liked to hear more from this person, or I felt kind of rushed in that discussion. So I'm not sure about the decision that we made. All that is helpful to being able to work more effectively. Um, Performance reviews, there's a framework for that, for evaluating individual people's performance in a compassionate and accountable way. Meeting evaluations is the same as checkouts. And then delegates, that the idea of having the bottom up link from different work teams, that's a form of feedback, right? You're feeding input from the bottom up, so to speak, although there's not quite the same high and low, up down dynamics. Um, and finally, objections to a decision in the consent process are their own form of feedback. And this is something that I think we talked about before, but um, I had a teacher who talked about how when someone objects to something, we should like thank them or express gratitude because they're trying to strengthen the decision and give us valuable input on like why this thing might not work. So again, it requires like a whole new way of relating to people and our coworkers and teammates where we're not trying to like maneuver or like manhandle or kind of like pull one over on anyone. We're trying to really understand if this is going to work for everyone, and hear their concerns as valid and something that we want to work with them to resolve. So in that sense, I think I found it to be a very personally transformative process to be a part of because it changes the way, yeah, that you relate to other people. And so again, to face problems like, climate change, economic inequality. I know some people here in this room work on mass incarceration, big problems. Uh, we need to pool talents and perspectives and be able to leverage all of our shared knowledge and skills in ways that can't be achieved oftentimes through hierarchies that confine the flow of information and power. And I was thinking about this in preparation for this conversation a little bit more, and it just like was hit home to me just how important this is to being able to attack and address some of the problems that we're facing and like take advantage of some of the opportunities that we're faced with likewise. So yeah, there's some interesting research on these themes, but just wanted to name that. Like the stakes of not including people's perspectives and skill sets are pretty high. So yeah, we're back at the beginning here. Um, I think the TLDR would be that we can't fix governance problems with technological solutions. And so we need to ask when we're thinking about our digital technologies and our governance systems, like, does that technology change the transparency of information, the distribution of power, the feedback channels? Like asking those governance questions about some of the tools we're using can also promote more ethical and effective uses of technology to support these goals. And last, this is a quote from Adrienne Marie Brown, who some of you might know. But here they say that small is good, small is all, the large is a reflection of the small. And so as we go back out into our different organizational contexts, I think I would like challenge you or urge you to think about the ways in which the places where we find ourselves, like today, the way in which those can be these smaller fractals that begin to reorganize power, reorganize relationships, do work differently as a way that can serve as a foundation for a broader transformation of society and maybe getting some of that power sharing up at the higher levels of governance and even, as Rashid said, government one day. And yeah, I just wanted to thank the Management and Social Justice Conference for hosting me, and to my teachers in sociocracy, Shayla Massey, Ted Rao, Jerry Cock Gonzalez, Michael Aponte, and Professor Srinivas from the New School. And thank you all for being here and for participating. I'm really glad to have learned with you and shared some of what I've learned. And here are some scholarly references as well. And happy to share more context for anything now or later. So I'll stop sharing my screen and we can perhaps take any other questions or ideas that are percolating. Oh, now I can see everyone. Sweet.
If we have time, I have a small question.
Yeah.
Because the way that I see there's like a learning curve with this, and the organization that I'm thinking of right now is also like the union, for example, which is a type of organization that a lot of people are members and they have to have the right to be there and have the right to participate. But also there is a differentiation between people who are there like every day coming and getting to know how these things work and being, accustomed to how its decisions are made, and then dealing with people coming in and out. And that's like, we want to keep that as a part of it. That's the ingrained part of, of having the right to be there. And sometimes you can't. And then people keep working on it because it needs to keep existing. But I wanted to get your perspective on this, like on this governance that you're talking about. Like, how can we make sure that we are still open for people to learn with us, and not make this as like a little group who knows how to make stuff and knows how to decide stuff, and then it keeps not being as welcoming to people who want to come and go.
Yeah, I feel like that's yes, that's like one of the big questions. And so in sociocracy as such is rooted in like small defined teams. And one of the principles I didn't talk about is that circles have defined membership, meaning like you can on a list, like you would have like who is a member of the COM circle, who is a member of the New School Student Workers Steering Committee, Union Steering Committee. And because if you're gonna empower individual people to be able to have that power, like consent is powerful, there needs to be you need to know like who is being invited into that and who's a member, which might seem counterintuitive to the goals of inclusivity, but I think having criteria for membership, defining who's in a circle is critical to building that trust and also just like buy-in to actually get work done. That being said, there's oftentimes a role for circles that are like communities of practice or a public meeting that can totally coexist with a circle. So it doesn't mean that you can't have meetings that include more people, but maybe you say that you clarify whether something is like an information sharing meeting or like an input gathering meeting. And when it's like a decision making meeting, one of the catchphrases is input from many, decisions by few, if that makes sense. And so I'm wondering if there would be a way to like have the opportunity to be on like a steering committee or decision making body be open to everyone and have really clear and transparent like procedures for how you would get on that committee, and chances for people to give their feedback, but maybe it's not the kind of thing where in the open meeting someone can propose something that like really isn't aligned with what the group has been working on for the last year, and like so it prevents from some of that like co-optation or even like good faith like idea sharing that maybe can confuse an organization's mission. I'm actually a part of a different group that's trying to navigate the same question, and so I don't have a good like answer, but besides to say that there's other kinds of formations that can be a part of sociocratic organizations that aren't themselves like a circle with defined membership. Um, and it's something that maybe you do like a hybrid kind of thing around, or you decide that um, you are going to have everyone be able to consent to a decision, even if they're new, but then have ways of uh, doing a lot of education, or you could have different tiers of membership. There are different ways to maybe, uh, yeah, split the difference there. Anyone else have thoughts on that? Yeah.
Um, to your point, Marie Therese, and to Fernanda's question, that's something that a group that I've been working with has been sort of wrestling with too. I think we've applied sociocratic governance to our decision making, but I think very imperfectly. And this is an organization that's it's open to the public. So like there are new people every single week, but there are also people who show up every single week. And I think that's led to these sort of like conflicts between like who gets a say, how much should how much weight should new people's votes really carry? And as of right now, it's like if you show up, you get a vote. But that also sort of like has stretched out like kind of mission critical or time sensitive decisions where we are doing rounds and we are talking through various people's thoughts and issues and trying to get toward that you had the image of the range of consent, trying to get a majority of people into that range of consent to the point where like I think at certain points, like we have actually veered into like almost autocratic decision making from time to time, where it's like, do we actually need like a vanguard party to like make decisions, like because stuff needs to be made right now, and we're spending a lot of time like educating or bringing up to speed folks who this is their first meeting or their second meeting and haven't been sort of like doing the work week after week. So I think this is a long-winded way of asking, like, what happens when members don't show up or don't do the work? Like, how do you deal with conflict and accountability?
Yeah. So on the last point, I guess that you mentioned of like how to balance people coming in every week, like the people who come every week and the people who come every week but are new each week. I think it might just speak to the need for two different kinds of meetings or bodies. Like, I think there's a real role for like a general circle or a planning committee or like the selected leadership, whatever it may be, and making a clear distinction between that and like a more open meeting that might have all those same steering committee people present and might be very much rooted in getting input and moving towards some kinds of like maybe lower hanging fruit decisions or, kind of thumbs up, thumbs down. But I think it might be helpful to distinguish between, yeah, like an open pub. And actually, I'm thinking a public power campaign I was a part of in DC did this. We had monthly public meetings that were come one, come all. We're going to share our strategy. We're going to get input on it. And if you want to get more involved in the operations of the org, like here's how to get involved in the working groups. And those working groups then have delegates up to the coordinating committee. So I don't know if there's, I think would the thing that's stopping that from being implemented be the discomfort in seeming exclusive? Is that what's oftentimes preventing?
I think that's it because this is a neighborhood group, so at the moment it's like open to all neighborhood residents are potential stakeholders, so like everyone should be able to have a decision or have decision making power, so that it's not a small group of people deciding, hey, we're going to try and acquire land to build a public food forest, which is what this group is trying to do. But yeah, it exactly has sort of like run into those tensions, and we've had a few closed meetings for people who have shown up week after week. So sort of moving toward the kind of structure that you've talked about. But yeah, I think that's why we've kind of imperfectly applied sociocracy at this point. It's sort of like evolving as we go along. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's the point, I think, to evolve and maybe this tension is pointing to a need to like, yeah, butt off a different circle that is maybe a sociocracy and like the manuals distinguishes between circles that are circles and other bodies that are communities of practice, that are advisory committees, that are, interest groups essentially. Like there's a role for all that too. And so yeah, I almost think we also need to contend with, as I'm hearing, the like maybe more like hyper woke culture where it's like all are welcome always, no, you can never say no to anyone. And there's definitely a place for that. And I also feel like when trying to work on tangible projects, there sometimes need to be membranes and boundaries to hold us so that we can, that's like a community is a community because there's some definition to it, right? Because there is a boundary that's permeable, but that is like uniting people around a shared purpose. So we also need to um, like be responsible to the people who we've invited into these structures.
Thank you. I have to run to another meeting, but
Yeah,
thank you so
thanks
much
for coming.
for your hosting this. Bye.
Okay, I know we're at time, so I can share a few links in the chat, and then if people want to keep discussing, we can stay. But there is a conference, a sociocracy conference online on the 24th that I just wanted to drop a link to. And I'll send a follow-up email, hopefully. But this is the virtual conference. And there is also a website or a group called Sociocracy for All that has a lot of the um, that is the group that I got a lot of my training from, and that has a lot of resources to share. In the handbook, Many Voices, One Song is kind of like the a Bible of it. Again, it's not to emphasize, I guess, one more time, uh, it's not a like a set of tools that you need to apply fully comprehensively in order to count as a sociocratic org. The more comprehensive sort of implementation, the more opportunities there are in some ways, but there's not a right or a wrong in the way that maybe some of our conversation could have led some of us to believe. And it's open to a lot of adaptation to individual contexts and to being informed by your own practices and your own needs. So hopefully we can all keep evolving the set of tools and contributing our needs and experiences to advance the field of dynamic governance, inclusive governance. So yeah, thank you for being here. Thanks. I'll pass it back.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Marie Therese. I think it was a fantastic presentation, as you can see, with the engagement. And you know, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about as an organizational scholar is that you know, every methodology, every approach has its boundaries. And we really need to learn, then look at a multiple set of you know, toolkits with aligned to our value system. I think that's the most important thing, right? And I think so looking at what is the context, what are the boundary conditions where this will work and this won't work. And I always joke saying that if I'm stuck in a building which is on fire, I don't want consensus decision making. I want them to use the best practice that they know to come and save me. Right. And so kind of understanding that that's an extreme case of like very hierarchical, very expertise driven, very benchmark process driven, but that also has actually, you know, baggages, which is actually, there's a very interesting study on you know, firefighters who perished in one of the largest fires in the history of the US because they followed their instructions so precisely, they were not cognitively flexible. And so, you know, so what I'm saying is that in human systems, it's dynamic and we are learning. And the other piece, I think people raise very interesting questions about conflicts and power because people do, this is the thing, right? Like, you know, individuals also come with their own agendas in any system. So no amount of planting a methodology is going to completely be a panacea for taking away everything that ails an organization or a community or a, you know, we are human beings are very willful and we want our own way and so kind of, you know, this is a great methodology for those who are willful, who want their own way, to channel their desire for agency into a collective process, right, that is respectful, that honors everybody's need to be engaged and you know, have some kind of a self-determination in decisions pertaining to them. So I think this was a fantastic workshop. Thank you very much. And I'm sure if you give us like, you know, things that you want to be sent out, we'll be happy to send out your slides and any other resources that you might want to share. So thanks everyone. And so there is one more next week, which is really interesting. And so please share, the word with people. And we have 3 more sessions planned. And after which the next year's conference will start preparing for it. And so thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.